Did you know one American ship hammered German fortress guns at Cherbourg so hard on the 25th of June, 1944, that shore batteries faltered while she kept firing 206 14-inch shells in under 3 hours? That ship was USS Texas, BB-35, a 27,000-ton floating fortress whose 14/45 rifles hurled 1,400-pound armor-piercing slugs miles inland, guided by radar and calm voices that corrected faster than enemy staffs could pass orders. 11 days earlier, off Omaha Beach and Pointe du Hoc, Texas had already delivered hundreds of main battery rounds to crack strong points and drown interlocking arcs of fire. So, soldiers could move. You can picture the sequence. A forward observer calls a church spire and a hedgerow line, plotting tables spin. Men in headsets repeat bearings. The breech hisses shut. The ship exhales thunder that walks into a slit of concrete. The sea smells of diesel and June rain. Near-miss pillars leap beside the hull, but the helmsman holds steady and the director steadies like a surgeon's hand. Loaders push powder bags. Turret captains call, "Up!" Shellmen lean their weight against steel, hot brass rings on the gratings. This is what American values look like under load discipline, speed, trust, turning a battleship into a mobile artillery regiment that answers a sergeant's voice from a mile of hedgerows away. The miracle is not one perfect shot. It is the 19th, the 40th, the 100th, landing with the same cold accuracy. That happens when a free people build schools that teach math, shops that cut steel, and crews that believe in one another enough to move at speed. Concrete is not a strategy. It is a material, and materials fail under concentrated skill. When ceasefire finally comes, smoke streams away in the Channel wind, and the batteries that once dominated the port are rubble. Sailors clean their stations, drink water that tastes faintly of metal, and log the day's business like any Tuesday. That, Ledger 206 heavy shells. Mission achieved is more than a number. It is a promise kept to a rifleman who needed the next 20 yards. If one ship can do that in a morning, imagine what happens when a free nation brings an ocean of steel, skill, and will to bear. Did you know nearly 7,000 vessels, warships, transports, LSTs, tugs, and landing craft carried well over 130,000 troops to Normandy in one day and still found time and position to fire as if they were inland howitzers? The American system made the impossible routine: spotter teams with radios, stable gun platforms, and doctrine that said, "Army calls, Navy fires." A sergeant pinned in a sunken lane could describe a church spire and a hedgerow notch. A director on a ship took that picture and translated it into elevation, deflection, and a steel answer arriving in minutes. Texas shifted missions like a prizefighter pounding Pointe du Hoc at dawn, then swinging to Omaha, then sliding to new coordinates, as Rangers climbed and infantry pushed. Boats ferried wounded back to grey hulls, where corpsmen worked under red lamps and cooks slid extra trays across the mess line. Proof that our ships were bridges as much as batteries. The Channel rolled under long Atlantic swell. On deck, men passed powder bags hand to hand. Below, plotting rooms ticked and hummed. Topside, talkers repeated bearings word perfect, so panic never entered the loop. The enemy kept resighting guns, but could not outrun corrections falling off spotted bursts. Interlocking arcs unravelled one command late. Listen to the small sounds inside the storm, the headset click before fire for effect, the breath a talker takes to repeat a bearing, the scrape of a boot as a loader leans the rammer home. Habits taught in classrooms, on drill fields, and at sea multiplied by abundance became minutes saved, lives saved, objectives taken. By month's end, the lodgment had swelled from beach strips into a living port fed by the same ocean fleet. Engineers paved roads out of sand. Cranes walked cargo across causeways. Tanks rolled off LSTs like a steel river with a schedule. The truth dawned on the defenders. Our timetable could not be broken. only delayed, and delay was defeat when every sunrise brought more ships. If a foxhole could talk, it would name the ship that answered. If the ocean could talk, it would say, "Keep calling, we are already on the way." Did you know a U.S. sailor refused rescue in a flooding compressor room, saying, "This is my station. I'll stay and give them air as long as the guns are going," and died at his post to keep those guns alive? That was Machinist's Mate First Class Robert R. Scott on USS California at Pearl Harbor, the 7th of December, 1941. On the same ship, Warrant Officer Thomas J. Reeves saw ammunition hoists fail and organized a hand-carried line through smoke and flame until fire took him, while Ensign Herbert C. Jones, mortally wounded, told would-be rescuers, "Leave me alone. I am done for. Get out before the magazines go off." Those sentences are the blueprint of American steel. When machines stop, people become the redundancy, and the battery keeps speaking. Sailors who learned courage in oil and choking smoke carried that discipline to every gun station off Normandy. Watch a turret's choreography. Shellmen heave, powdermen slide bags, breech faces hiss shut, pointers call ready, talkers repeat, ranges exactly, so fear never crosses the circuit. The enemy misread that composure, thinking hits would shatter it. Instead, hits tightened it, because vows had already set the bar for what "hold your station" means. That is how a battleship can sit under straddles and still lay fire into a hillside aperture like a surgeon's fingertip finding a pulse. Put those vows beside the radios ashore. A lieutenant with a handset crouches behind a hedgerow and traces a line from a farmhouse to a road bend. The ship answers with steel and a correction cycle measured in breaths. Rangers signal from Point du Hoc. Destroyers nose in so close they can see muzzle flashes and fire point blank. Courage on deck meets courage in the fields, and the two make a circuit no fortress can unplug. Pearl Harbor did not only wound, it taught. It turned grief into a school and graduates into crews who steadied the fleet on the roughest mornings of 1944. When those names are read, Scott, Reeves, Jones, the deck goes quiet, and even the youngest sailor knows the standard he inherits. The guns at Cherbourg did not just run on powder and brass. They ran on sentences spoken in the dark that never stopped echoing. Did you know the proximity fuse, a pocket radar inside a 5-inch shell, made up roughly a quarter of U.S. Navy anti-aircraft ammunition, yet delivered about half of all aerial kills by late 1943. That tiny brain turned near misses into lethal airbursts and changed the sky over fleets and beachheads, freeing ships to focus on their work ashore while swatting threats they once feared. The trick felt like magic, but was American math at speed. Physicists in labs, machinists on lathes, inspectors with gauges, gunners who trusted a new fuse and made probability the enemy of enemy pilots. Pair that hard edge with soft power that still startles. The Navy ran an ice cream barge at Ulithi, capable of thousands of servings a day, and capital ships like New Jersey maintained their own parlors. It sounds whimsical until you picture a gun crew coming off watch, salt on their lips, handed a cold cup that says, "You are not alone. Our factories reach you even here." The same reach traveled the other way. On American soil, POW camps such as Trinidad, Colorado, spread across hundreds of acres, housed thousands, served hot meals, put men to work, and sent many home grateful rather than hardened. A former prisoner remembered first tastes of vanilla and meat after years of thin rations and wrote letters that said freedom looked like abundance. The enemy's lesson was brutal and kind at once. We could swat you from the air with a scientific fuse and then feed your captured comrades with a generous supper. Precision and plenty together made resistance feel not only dangerous but pointless, because the gap was human as well as technical. Listen to the deck at dusk. The clang of a galley pan, the click of a fuse setter, a laugh that breaks tension before general quarters. Morale rides with technology. Kindness rides with strength. When call-downs came aircraft inbound, battery prepare the same hands that held ice cream cups, swung to stations, and built a sky of fragments that saved ships and soldiers alike. Did you know the largest German battery around Cherbourg, called Battery Hamburg, dueled an American battleship while US infantry closed in, and the ship kept firing until she literally sailed out of range? On the 25th of June 1944, Rear Admiral Morton Deo's bombardment groups brought Texas, Arkansas, and Nevada, plus cruisers and destroyers against 20 casemated positions, sealing the port. Texas alone expended 206 14-inch rounds in less than 3 hours, then retired by order. Mission complete: neutralize coastal guns that could rake 7 Corps and deny resupply. Photographs show geysers towering between Texas and Arkansas as heavy shells straddled them. Crews stayed at posts, breech faces hissing open, hot brass ringing on gratings, talkers repeating orders word perfect. A shore spotter called a correction off a church spire. The next salvo walked into the aperture like a final argument. The enemy tried smoke and auxiliary observers, but tempo beat them. Plot, fire, adjust, fire again, a loop so tight staff telephones could not keep up. On the ground, GIs felt the shock wave roll through their boots and started forward because the casemate that owned the road a minute before no longer existed. Engineers marked lanes, medics moved, quartermasters checked watches and smiled because the schedule was holding. Sailors ate in snatches, wiped soot from their necks, and went back to work because there was time for one more mission. A port that could not fall was being redefined by people who treated impossible tasks like checklists. Engage until neutralized, then reload for the next town. That was the American rhythm. It came from factories that never slept, schools that taught precision, and a culture that trusts crews to execute without drama. Concrete can be thick, but doctrine can be thicker when layered with courage, numbers, and timing. By nightfall, the map looked different, and the sea looked closer. The fortress discovered it was fighting a country, not a ship. And the country was not tired. Did you know that by the 30th of June 1944, just 24 days after D-Day, the Allied bridgehead had swollen from strips of sand into a living port fed by nearly 7,000 ships and landing craft, supported by roughly 11 to 12,000 aircraft and close to 200,000 naval personnel? On the day itself, between 133 and 156,000 troops went ashore. In the weeks after, vehicles and tonnage turned hedgerows into highways for American armor, while battered Cherbourg began pulling freight straight from Liberty's arsenal. That is what an industrial democracy does. It lands, it expands, it delivers, and it keeps delivering while fighting across 2 oceans. The enemy finally understood that American dominance wasn't a moment, it was a pipeline no plan could choke, a schedule that kept arriving as batteries fell and staff maps changed. Think about the scale behind a single firefight. If one ship can throw 206 heavy shells in a morning, what do a month of convoys mean for fuel, rations, ammunition, and replacements? They mean the soldier who survives today has better odds tomorrow, because the ships will bring more of everything and the guns will still be ready. They mean POWs on our soil. Discover that defeat here does not mean starvation, but decent treatment, men gaining weight, learning English, writing home about fairness they had not expected. At sea, a gun crew might finish a watch with a cup of ice cream. Ashore, a farm detail might finish a shift with a hot meal and a newspaper. Strength and generosity walk in step, and the effect lasts longer than any bombardment. Listen as the chapter closes. Cranes clack, causeways rumble, trains begin to move, because a port that should have stayed closed is open. The map keeps widening, the river of supplies thickens, and the men up front feel a steady push at their backs. No other nation on earth did all of that at once, on that scale, with that spirit. That is why Texas could fight an army's forts and win, and why America could cross an ocean and stay. Did you know engineers built an artificial harbor off a hostile coast and made it swallow cargo like a real city port within days? The British-American Mulberry Bee off Arromanches used floating roadways and giant concrete caissons, and at its peak pushed roughly 9,000 tons ashore in a single day. On the US beaches, the 1st Engineer Special Brigade organized chaos into lanes, while Navy beach battalions flagged LSTs, LCTs, and DUKWs, the 2.5-ton amphibious duck, to the exact sand they needed. This wasn't luck. It was planning that measured tides, surf, and German guns, then dared to schedule victory anyway. A DUKW splashed through CHOP with cases of 30-06 for M1, Garand's, 75mm rounds for Shermans, and sulphur for medics. The driver kept his eyes on a hand-painted sign that matched his chalk number, and a corporal on the beach waved him to the right causeway. Behind them, Seabees adjusted pontoon causeways as if they were Lego, turning surf into lanes for trucks that had landed just hours before. Each lane was a promise, and each promise was kept because the fleet fed the beach without pause. When weather smashed Mulberry A at Omaha, the answer wasn't panic. It was muscle memory. Unload over the open sands. Make the tide your partner. Keep the road net moving. By June 30, the beachhead was no longer a beach. It was a port fed by nearly 7,000 ships and landing craft, with cranes clacking, traffic MPs blowing whistles, and engineers printing road signs faster than companies could ask for them. The enemy thought storms and concrete would do their work for them. Instead, Americans treated storms like another checklist. The revelation every private could feel was simple and huge. The ocean itself had been converted into a warehouse aisle, and your resupply was always inbound. A German prisoner stared at the endless line of vehicles and muttered that no map he had ever seen looked like this. Ours did. It was drawn in grease pencil on bridge windows, chalked on bows, and stamped into pocket notebooks, then executed by sailors and soldiers who believed a timetable is a weapon. Stand on the dune at dusk and listen. Horns, clutches, the thud of crates. That is the sound of an ocean bridge doing the impossible, every hour on the hour. Did you know an American battleship could compute a firing solution in seconds while rolling in a swell, then walk 14-inch shells into a casemate slit you could cover with your hand? The trick was a trio: Mark 8 fire control radar, a Ford instrument company, Mark 1 ampere analog computer, and calm men who trusted both. A spotter plane, an OS-2U Kingfisher, circled inland, its pilot describing a road bend and a smokestack, while a backseater read grid refs in a voice so even you would think it was a training hop. Below, plotters spun dials, rang bearings, and watched the solution settle as naturally as a bubble in a level. A turret captain reached for the breech, the cradle lifted, powder bags slid home, and the ship's heart gave one slow, deep push of thunder. The first splash marked short. A correction came back, the second walked in, the third vanished in the target. You could feel the ship steady herself after the recoil like a boxer resetting his feet. Now multiply that by 10 guns. A director officer wiped salt from his lip and repeated the next correction. No drama, no poetry. Just reach, touch, and break. The enemy believed concrete made them safe. The radar would argue otherwise, drawing range through haze, smoke, and the tricks gunners use when the light goes wrong. The sailors believed in the loop, observe, compute, fire, adjust because it had been drilled in classrooms and in North Atlantic weather, and because it protected a private first class behind a hedgerow counting his own breaths. Even the sounds felt engineered, the soft click of a synchro, the heavy slam of a breech block, the barked, "Stand by," that cut through wind and cordite. This is why Army calls, Navy fires, wasn't a slogan. It was a habit that put a sniper's finger on a ship's trigger. Long after the smoke thinned, the plotters would pencil the mission's last timings in a log and feel a private pride. Another target silenced, another road opened. The numbers prove the point, but the human memory seals it the way a voice on the net could steady a whole sector. On that day, the battleship was not a relic. It was a scalpel with a steel handle, held by a crew that never shook. Did you know one plant, Willow Run, built B-24 Liberators so fast that at full song a completed bomber rolled out about every 63 minutes? Multiply that idea across a continent. Liberty ships slid off ways by the thousands. 1. The Robert E. Peary set a record at 4 days and 15 hours from keel to launch. The US turned out roughly 2,710 Liberty ships, tens of thousands of aircraft engines, and enough M1 Garans that the phrase, "the greatest battle implement ever devised," felt like a plain description, not a boast. That kind of volume turned timetables into weapons. A platoon could plan on resupply, a battalion on trucks, a corps on fuel, a fleet on ammunition heavier than boxcars, and the promise would be kept. Put a B-24 over the channel in the morning, a C-47 over a forward strip at noon, and a freighter under a new pier that evening. The maps might change, the delivery didn't. The enemy was not blind to this. Prisoners blinked at our motor pools, our pile of spare tires, our crates of typewriters and frying pans and medical kits, and asked how we made so much so fast. The answer was freedom scaled. Open science, open bidding, and a habit of trusting crews to fix what breaks. The same culture that let a machinist suggest a jig change gave a turret captain the latitude to shave seconds from a drill without waiting for a memo. And we didn't only wield abundance like a hammer, we used it like a handshake. On American soil, hundreds of thousands of Axis prisoners learned that food didn't vanish in the night and that a guard might point them to a library after roll call. In Colorado, Camp Trinidad's 700 acres spread across fields and workshops where men worked, ate, wrote letters, and found that their captors did not hate them. A former prisoner licked a spoon of vanilla and laughed because it tasted like a holiday. That laugh mattered. It said we were building two things at once: victory now and memory later. In this light, a battleship's thunder is not just noise, it is the edge of a triangle whose other points are a factory horn and a mess hall bell. No other nation fused those sounds at that scale, at that speed, with that heart. Did you know a single Iowa-class broadside threw roughly 24,300 pounds of metal 9 16-inch shells at about 2,700 pounds each, out beyond 20 miles? A second later came the shock wave that prickled the skin and made every loose bolt ring. Texas, older but mean, could still loose about 14,000 pounds in a 10-gun, 14-inch salvo, and do it again and again until the target stopped answering. Now, line up the ground truth that followed those blasts. The P-51D Mustang, with its Packard-built Merlin, gave American infantry an umbrella that reached deep, and the M4 Sherman, 30 tons of will, with a 75mm gun, rode off LST ramps like a habit, because the bridge of ships never broke. DUKWs paddled cargo where piers did not exist, 2.5 tons at a time, their drivers reading tide and surf as if it were a road map. Trains near the front wore new American rails within weeks of breakout, and depots sprouted from wheat fields with schedules pinned to tent poles. Inside the United States, a bomber came off a line every hour at Willow Run, while a Liberty ship's plates met a welder's torch in another time zone. By the time the newsreel hit a theatre, the numbers had already been beaten again. And there is another kind of math. Roughly 400,000 plus Axis prisoners would live behind American wire before war's end, and camps fed them well enough that a doctor could track men gaining pounds instead of losing them. At some sites, guards logged ice cream issues like any other ration, a small thing that reads like science fiction to anyone who has studied war. Put these sums together, and you see why a fortress could not win. Concrete can resist pressure. It cannot resist pressure plus momentum plus replacement plus mercy. The enemy staffer, staring at a casualty graph, felt something most charts do not show. Our graphs bent reality for the private at the point of contact. The bullets, beans, and bandages mantra wasn't a slogan. It was a complete sentence. punctuated by broadsides that shoved the day forward. Turn the page and the totals are bigger again. That is how you make an offensive feel inevitable. Did you know the garrison of Cherbourg tried to bargain from ruins while American guns still had them under the table? 7 Corps, under J. Lawton Collins, pressed in from the Cotentin as Navy groups kept coastal teeth from biting, and by late June, the city's impregnable tag sounded like a bad joke. General Karl Wilhelm von Schlieben came out to surrender, while coastal batteries that once boasted of range and armor sat cracked and silent behind him. Look at the sequence that made that meeting possible. Infantry took junctions one by one. Engineers dragged obstacles off roads. Medics flagged litter teams. And warships delivered on every shouted request for smoke or steel. The fortress discovered that its safe assumptions, ammo on time, orders unheard by the enemy, batteries that could shift fire at leisure, had died sometime between the first salvo and the 7th. The Americans had built a machine that moved too quickly to be outguessed. Even the weather fell in with this truth. When surf ruined one plan, men launched another. When fog hugged a ridge, spotter planes and radar closed the gap. On surrender day, a private held a canteen that had crossed the Atlantic twice, and a package of rations that tasted the same as the ones he had opened in training. That sameness was comfort, and comfort was strength. It said the line behind him was not going to bend. Prisoners filed past stacks of ammunition and spare parts, and stared the way a man stares at a mountain he didn't know existed. They were not beaten by tricks. They were beaten by tempo. A field telephonist on the German side would later tell a guard, in a flat voice, that the Americans arrived again every time his colonel needed a pause. That is what a pipeline looks like at the foxhole level. A relentless present tense. In the docks, cranes began to move even as smoke lifted. Somewhere beyond the mole, a grey ship checked bearings and made ready to fire if called. The port had changed names in the only way that matters. Its schedules now belonged to us. Did you know victory can sound like a timetable? By June's end, the sound around Normandy was clocks metronoming across a continent, convoy arrivals, offloading windows, road nets opening by hour, railheads waking by dawn, sorties stepping to full throttle by noon. A single ship's ledger, 206 heavy shells in under 3 hours, becomes the opening drum roll for a month where everything arrives on time. What follows is the American pattern. Science sits in a fuse. Kindness sits in a galley. Courage sits in a compartment where a sailor says, "This is my station," and nobody needs to ask him twice. On that foundation, the rest stands up by itself. M1 Garands clack in rhythm because factories refuse to miss beats. P-51Ds roam because mechanics on metal matting can make an airplane sing. Shermans grind forward because an ocean bridge keeps gas and tracks coming. POWs behind our wire eat, read, work, and gain weight, and the news travels home to families who were told to fear us. Children remember ice cream in a place where ice used to be a winter. A man writes that he learned the word fair. That is also a weapon, and a very American one. Generosity as psychological artillery. The enemy's last illusions crumble in that light. If you cannot break the schedule, you cannot break the army that rides it. If you cannot shame the people feeding their enemies, you cannot unmake their confidence. This is why a battleship could fight an army's forts and win, why a beach could become a port in weeks, why a private could believe in tomorrow before sunset. Walk the quay at night, hear cranes clack, feel the deck lift under your boots, smell diesel and coffee and cordite. The guns are quiet only because men who know their names made them so. The lesson is not complicated, and it is not soft. A free nation, trained and tooled and decent, is the heaviest thing in the world. It moves on rails of promise, under sails of math, with hands that do not let go. When that nation aims, even concrete learns to give.